Hello, everyone. Welcome to Soul Sessions. This week we are talking about archetypal symbols in one of our favorite movies, or series of movies, The Lord of the Rings. We've been doing a series on archetypes in modern culture. Yeah. And today is, by popular demand, we'll be talking about Gollum, the Frodo, the Ring, and all the wonderful characters in The Lord of the Rings. If you haven't seen the movies, you'll still learn a lot. So hopefully you'll catch up on them this weekend.
Yeah.
How are you today?
I often use that reference of the little hobbit house or the little hobbit hole.
Yes.
Because it really represents our comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. I always think of one of my favorite line in the movie is when Sam says to Frodo, if I take one more step, this will be the farthest I've been from the Shire. And there's times in our life where we feel that I'm going beyond where I had journeyed before. And that's what this, really the theme of this movie is all about, is that hero's journey and the quest for knowledge, the quest for truth, the character. And so
we're going to be talking about the book, Jungian psychology, of course, and how would we see that, and how would we interpret Tolkien's work from the Jungian perspective. A little bit of the archetypes that we see in the book and the movies, and then what that teaches us about how we live today. Our technological journey through the universe.
Technological journey. So I never read the book. Did you read the books?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That reminds me. I wanted to dedicate this podcast to my good friend Bobby Merkich, who passed away in the early 90s. Way too young, way too early. But he introduced me when we were kids. I think I was about 10. To The Hobbit. He's the first one that said, look at this book, it's really cool, read it. And I've been a fan since then. Anyway, thank you, Bobby. Wherever you are, we still think of you and miss you, and your inspiration still continues. Yeah, so let's see. The book was actually written in the 30s.
Wow.
Very early on, which of course it has some relationship to Jung, because before Tolkien wrote the book, he was in World War I and got to observe kind of the machinery that was coming up through the industrial age. The Industrial Revolution was in full force, and he got to experienced firsthand the horrors of the weapons that human beings were forging and creating. And a lot of that went into his writings, of course. Now, almost at the same time, though Jung was a little bit older, but around 1913 to 1917, Jung was going through his transformational journey. That's when he started writing the Red Book. And it was around that time also that Tolkien was developing these languages of the elves.
Oh, wow.
And the maps of
very
Middle
symbolic.
Yes. So we're always caught up in these time cycles. We're children of our time.
The archetypes are bigger than us, and like you say, calling us to step into a role.
And it is a collective experience. I mean, Jung came up with this idea of the collective unconscious, which is really where great art comes from.
And when you say collective experience, what do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at culture, the world is a stage for us. Who are the other players on the stage right now? What is going on in the big stage of the world? that's where we have to live our lives, meaning that's where we play out our individual roles, not in some just personal living room. Because
we're playing on the world stage.
Yeah.
So the collective experience, meaning that you can't really exist in the world without the collective experience. You can't just be isolated. And even though we all feel isolated right now, you can't really live your life that way. That's, I think, why I think this time has been so hard for people, because we are so social and connected, and we depend on each other for so many things. And everyone plays different roles in our life.
Yeah.
And every system and every experience, like the archetypes aren't just people, they're patterns.
Human behavioral patterns, cultural patterns. And yeah, so Jung presents this idea that really gives us a better insight into the Lord of the Rings. This idea that inspiration is coming from the collective unconscious. So the individual, Tolkien himself, might think, well, I've decided to write this book.
I have these great ideas.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the deeper, he's getting them from the collective.
That's right. Now, the individual, of course, is the instrument.
Yes.
Who delivers the goods to the collective. But yeah, his inspiration comes from deeper patterns. And he himself, Tolkien himself, talks about how he saw that the Industrial Revolution had stripped human beings of their mythologies, especially in England or in the UK. People were kind of all of a sudden jarred into this mechanistic industrial age,
Or intellectual, logical,
and
versus creative.
all the beauty and mythology and kind of dreaminess of fairy tales was taken away.
You know, that's what I love about Jung's work, is because other personal development I've done was really about building up the ego, and like you're relying on your own personal resources and your personality, and then maybe making it a little better to function in this like world. Where Jung's work, it really is about you're allowing that ego to step aside versus trying to fix it, and you're allowing these other forces that are a bigger you live through you. And this is, I think, that why we attract so many creative people in our work to our coach training, because it's really the root of creativity is in the collective unconscious.
Yeah. And Jung says that great art, and certainly the book and the whole stories that evolved out of Tolkien's work, is great art. It is art at its highest form, which means it speaks to almost everyone on the planet. It has this universal quality. Although it's coming from an individual, it has this universal appeal that speaks to the collective unconscious and consciousness. And then it creates culture in a way. It forms the way we start to see the world. We see in his work this idea of, okay, the machinery is coming up, the technology is arising, not only in the present moment. And this is an interesting part, right? That here is someone who's looking at the past. So he was gathering mythologies from all over the world, the things that he was interested in, the stories and myths and languages from around the world, meaning from the past, bringing them into the present moment that he was living, the industrial age. But it also, great art speaks about the future. Where are we going with this technology and building this machinery and these weapons? Where is human kind going with this?
And I know you're from a man's perspective, it's the technology and the weapons and that kind of like thinking about industry. But for us, even women, it's think of socially how technology has interfered with our lives right? Socially, how do we build relationships? How we date right now is on an app. We're not like actually meeting people. So not only these big like military industrial complexes and big machineries, but even in our everyday life, the technology, how it interferes. I mean, in a way, during the pandemic, it's great that we have Zoom and that we can do videos, and we don't have to do a live event and put people in health risk. And we can talk to our loved ones on video, and it's great, But how much has social media played a role in harming our own ability to relate, and just the I don't know, just kind of the interactions people have. It's just can be very destructive and uncaring and cold, because there's that distance and that machine in between you, and you're just typing into your phone. So you wouldn't say something to someone like one-to-one, something you would say on a Facebook post, arguing with someone. Most people in person have a different thing. So I think technology is interfering with that as well.
Yeah, so Tolkien deliberately set out to build a new literature of mythology for his people, for his country. But of course, he ended up changing the world through that. And that is definitely part of the individuation process, as Jung defines it, that in doing your personal individual passion, your own dharma, you're bringing into the world something that's needed, instead of just being a cog in the machine,
playing the default.
Yes, you're actively participating in the creating of culture, of history, of defining your age. And Jung definitely says you have to live in your present age. So if your present age is about technology, you have to engage with it, even if it's about defining it. Like, how do we use this?
Redefining, how we use those tools.
Yeah, not necessarily just saying it's bad and we should get rid of it.
No.
But how do we think about it? How do we define it? How do we use it?
Well, just like anything else, if you just let people run on their egos, that's really what happened with like social media, which everyone is familiar with pretty much, is that when you run on ego, it all the dynamics of neuroses of everyone comes into play. And so how do you, when you're on social media, how do you bring some higher, something new into the experience, something new? So for me, I've been posting on my page just like really great quotes or something to think about, and like moving the positive and the depth and questioning life. And, for me, that's how I'm choosing to express myself on social media versus bashing people or getting up in arms. And, I think there's a lot of that out there, and people are getting in arguments, and everyone has strong opinions about different things. And it's like, what do you want to bring into that environment, and how can you shift the environment? If we all decided that we want to make the environment better, we could actually do it. It's just not enough of us are actually saying, oh, I can actually change it. So whether it's a digital environment or a physical environment, we're always able to bring in something else than our default.
Absolutely. So before we go into the archetypal characters in these stories, keep this in mind. Jung says that great art is also talking about the future. It's almost like if you think about the prophets, the myths that come through great art are giving us a heads up as to what's coming up in the future for us.
Like that guy who wrote 1984. It's like living in that future world. He wrote that in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And
maybe earlier.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it was 40s maybe, and just after World War II, around World War II. But yeah, you read that now, and you're thinking that's going on right now. He's predicting the future. So let's go into the archetypal characters of Lord of the Rings. And I think, where do you want to start? Because there's so many.
Well, with Frodo.
Frodo is the main, hero, right? The reluctant hero. Because he didn't really want to go, right?
That's a good point. He is reluctant, and he's really a failure at everything he does. Because he's the weakest, basically. He's the smallest. He's only kind of a teenager, right?
Yeah.
When he goes
innocent, like it's an innocent, and that's really the journey starts off of the hero as the fool, not knowing, confused, not knowing where to go.
Yeah, and throughout the journey, he just wants to go back home.
Yeah,
he's not like into it. He wants to be back in the Shire, of course, and be safe. But he is chosen in a way to do this big mission, and so he represents our lot as human beings. That life chooses us, right? We come forth into the world, and we're on this mission that we didn't really choose, but now we have to meet the challenges of this grand mission, and
grow up, basically. Leave the Shire, leave our comfort zone, like you say, leave the Hobbit house.
Yeah.
And go out into the world. And it's a call to adventure in the hero's journey. It's that call to adventure. And we're always called, and many people don't answer the call. They just put it off. And it's like a broad world out there, a big opportunities and potential in us that we're called to become.
Right.
Beyond our personality, beyond this little human personality, the collective unconscious has these powerful archetypes that want to live through us, want to be expressed, and the role that we can play. And so the hero archetype was basically activated, and he had to step into that, even though his little ego was, no, I don't think so. And Sam, what role did he play? He was his best friend. He was his kind of like, we all need a community. We all need people to be next to us, a best friend, someone that will keep us, reminding us that who we are. And like, 'cause so he's kind of like taking him on the journey, but also reminding him of his true self. Like, you're still the same person, don't get lost in the journey as well. So he kind of tethers him a little to the home of who he is, but also allows him to go on that journey.
Yeah, he's
keeping him in line.
A good friend, no doubt. Very much like I was saying about Bobby, he played Sam to my journey, right? My process of individuation, of growing up. But let's talk about the Shire, because the Shire is a character in its own right. It is this community of people, and they're partying and having a good time.
It's almost like Eden in a way in the Bible, like that kind of perfect, everything's perfect and abundant, and you notice there was food everywhere, and it's colorful, and
community, certainly
there's no danger.
But at the same time, it's what creates the dark shadow, in that the Shire becomes an idealized space to be in. Very much the persona.
Like an attachment to it.
An attachment, and you have to fit in. Gandalf, when he shows up, he's considered a disturber of the peace, in a sense, because he's bringing in this...
Stirring things up.
Yeah, and he's coming from the outside. And so that's frowned upon. And there you see how... From, let's say, just from the ordinary point of view, it looks like, well, I would rather be a hobbit and be in Hobbitville, right, and just be peaceful.
I know. I was thinking, why didn't he just stay? He's so comfortable there.
Stay in my little hobbit hole. But it's what creates that external other, which is the opposite of that.
And what's interesting is in the second, well, there's the Hobbit, which is the original book, where his uncle was actually the first one who discovered the ring and got the Bilbo, and but he had left and did his journey, which is in the next movie, but it's the prequel to this. But he did come back to the Shire transformed, and he had all this wisdom that he brought. But I thought it was really cool that he didn't want to stay there. Like he was like, he needed to go back to the adventure. Right. So when we leave that comfort zone and we go out, when we return, we're different. And then the comfort zone isn't as like fun anymore, or it doesn't fill you up anymore. So in our life, we leave it's like for me, like going back home, you go back home to your family and you're just like, it's nice and comfortable, but then you're like, I'm different now. This isn't
Thanksgiving.
I'm not the same person. And then this isn't as comfortable as it used to be. And I know for some people, family has never been comfortable, but we always feel that we can't, like you always say, we can't go back home. And I remember when we left Denver, like 10 years ago now, we moved to New York. And we went back and did an event there. And I had changed so much from when I was in Denver and I saw my old friends. And it was like a different experience. Like you said, it's not the same place you left. And I think that's what happens when we leave. We find we're kind of breaking away from that idealized place. We wake up and we see it for what it is. And we're not as attached anymore. It could still be there, but we're not as attached or diluted in that it's the perfect ideal place. And so many of us can relate to that of you leave your hometown, you go out and you work somewhere else, and then you go back and you kind of connect with your old friends and you've grown and they've grown, and it's like going back to your college reunion or high school reunion, and you just don't, you're a different person. So when we leave it, it's almost like we have to let go of that idealization and that perfect image of what it used to be.
Yeah, often the journey of individuation begins with something that jars us out of that comfortable sleep of community and being in nature. So let's talk about Gandalf, because he represents the wise old man, which is a Jungian archetype of really the inner wisdom. And he is, of course, the inner guide. He's not external to us. He's part of us. But because he is an archetype, he is autonomous, meaning we're going to experience him outside of our ego persona. It feels like we're speaking to someone else.
Yeah, it's like the collective, right? And so
Jung had his own wizard inside. He called it Philemon.
Oh, yeah.
And in the Red Book, he drew him out very much like an old man with a beard and kind of the wise old man who instructed him and guided him in his process. So in the book, Gandalf comes into the Shire. And all hell breaks loose, of course.
And and he sets the fireworks off. And then that dragon kind of comes, and then it turns, the kids play with, like, it's like the two boys, Merry and I can't remember the other kid's name, but they were like the tricksters, Pippin. A little bit. Pippin. They were kind of like the people that, like, almost childlike.
Yeah.
It's like the magical child almost that brings in, like, they stir things up in a way.
That's right.
They cause a lot of problems on the journey, but interesting. And then Gollum.
Go
You
ahead.
want to talk about Gandalf?
I was going to go for the ring, because the ring sets us up to kind of how to deal with Gollum, or what is going on with Gollum. What is Gollum's role? So if you notice, the action begins with a ring, right? Bilbo passes the ring on to Frodo, and that's when that darkness starts to creep in, meaning the shadow starts to appear in a person's life. This awareness of something outside the parameter of the Shire.
So is the ring the kind of the powers of the collective unconscious?
Well, mythology is like dream work. It has many layers of meaning. And so it functions in many ways. But ultimately, for me, the ring represents the wheel of karma. When we're in the Shire, when we're in our innocent phase, we're caught up in pleasing others, creating a persona that fits into society. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need to do that. But we're caught because it's all about fitting in.
It's like an attachment, like that idea of Eastern philosophy of attachment.
Yeah.
And I always think of it because they described it as the power of the world, that you can have the power of the world. So it's more that attachment to the material and the physical versus the spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah, the seeking pleasure, power, life in...
But not spiritual power, material power, like factories and kingdoms and
that's right,
the human pursuits.
Very much so, in kind of seeking out immortality, but in the physical sense. And so the ring, this kind of awareness of the power of the ring, which hypnotizes people.
Yeah.
Right. Even Gandalf
doesn't want to touch it. He picked it up like the stick or whatever. He was not willing. Oh, his little thing. He didn't want to touch it.
He didn't want to touch it because he understood that it can seduce even our spiritual wisdom. It can.
How many times have we been seduced in the world?
Yeah. And so you see people that start out with good intentions and they have spiritual purpose, but they're seduced by the money, the fame, the power. And
why are you looking at me?
And not to point fingers, right? But yeah, we're all in danger of that. So Gandalf, being weary of the ring,
says we need to destroy this. So it's almost like destroy our karma, or to clear our karma. And if the ring is circular, and that's how karma feels, it's you're never really getting anywhere. You're just craving and craving and craving, and it's never enough. And so it almost magnifies, the ring magnifies that craving. Because if you notice, people, like you said, get hypnotized, but it's also they're craving the ring. It's like it's that craving in itself of needing like love from others, or needing money or security, the things that we all want to crave in life, that seduces us into forgetting and hypnotizes us into forgetting our true nature.
Yeah. And it has that hypnotic power because it's so immediate. And so, like, our senses are geared towards instant gratification. And so that immediacy of that power is what it gives it its seductive power, right? We want it now.
Yeah.
It
almost is like gives you a promise, like it's the ring, the way they got so like, wow, it's that kind of feeling of I'm going to win the lottery tomorrow, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
That it's going to solve all my problems if I just possess this.
And
so
then,
it's like possession and attachment.
Yes, and then we see Gollum there as what happens to a person that buys into that.
Yes.
Because he was an ordinary hobbit. But he was
hanging out, swimming, fishing with his brother.
But he was seduced by the power of the ring, and it consumed him. It took him into the underworld, but in the sense of his lower nature, his animal nature, his base elements.
He lost all his humanity. He became more of a creature. And we can kind of be like that when we're attached. We feel like we're just this creature that is not human anymore. We're just so hungry or so angry or reactive to life and fearful and almost that animal nature of survival that we get to. And so he's pure survival, pure ego. Yeah, that kind of lower nature. That would be a great way to describe it. And I love that he led Frodo to the higher point. So in a way that he was instrumental in helping them get rid of the ring, but kind of in a tricky way. So how would you relate that to Jungian psychology and the process of individuation?
Right. So Jung says you cannot transcend your persona ego without integrating the shadow. In other words, the shadow has to be a part of your process. And you see that in the journey, Frodo and Sam eventually end up with Gollum, and Gollum becomes their guide into the crack of doom, where they can essentially get rid of the ring.
I think it's interesting too that Sam evolves and he actually becomes the true hero of the whole thing, because if it wasn't for Sam, Frodo and Gollum would have, who knows what would have happened. But Sam was kind of like a high, like I think of it like when we talk about the higher knowledge and the divine intelligence, like that ability to see clearly while you're balancing these forces.
Yeah.
That part of your psyche that has that clarity and that kind of, I know where we're going, and I know it's scary, but we got to keep going and moving.
Absolutely. Yeah, you see that friendliness, dedication to your friends, kind of a noble purpose, and just staying human, staying grounded.
And we need that part of our mind that we can get lost in the ego, and we would get lost if we just didn't have that kind of focus point to relate to the collective. We have to have that kind of divine consciousness that is beyond the ego, that's available to us right now.
Yeah. That's why you see in a lot of spiritual practices the cultivation of humility, compassion. Those are the key elements that get you going on your journey, because if you start off with I want power, you're already seduced basically by the ring, and
Sam wasn't seduced, and he knew he couldn't handle it, but he also wasn't attached to like making it about him.
Right.
Like he was serving the purpose, and that's that idea that there's no selfishness in his act. It was purely I'm standing by you. I'm allowing. So this part of ourselves that says, I know you're having a tough time, I'm standing by you. That other part of your psyche that can just hold the light for you as you go on your journey. And we all need to cultivate that in our lives.
Yeah.
Our own little inner Sam.
Yeah, so back to Gollum, we see this incredible creature that is really an ideal representation of the shadow. Again, he lives underground, meaning he's in the unconscious. He represents the unsavory aspects of our human nature, right? That we have to eat other animals. We have to kind of crawl around in the dirt to survive, and that we have a physical body that is inherited from our animal ancestry.
That's not very clean, and it's hairy and smelly. And like, it's not like this, you have to wash it all the time. It's just like unpure environment that we're in, that we have to live with.
And it's this
and we
idea.
make it pretty with earrings and nice pretty shirts and jackets.
In essence, Jung talks about how modern civilization is a lot about denying our animal nature by covering it over with this covering of civilization.
Because we think we're separate from animals because we're human, but we have that. We all evolved from them, so we have to remember that they're our ancestors.
Absolutely. And it's our connection to nature again. Doing shadow work reconnects us to nature without destroying it, without pushing it away.
And I'm sure in Jung's time, the Victorian times, there was a lot of suppression of sexuality, of even homosexuality. People couldn't, really be themselves. A woman who wants to start a career would be looked at as,
loose.
Loose. No, almost like someone who doesn't choose marriage as sort of
rebellious.
What's the word? it's kind of a negative word that people use on women who don't marry and don't go in their career path. I can't remember the name of it, but I used to call myself that all the time when I was single, just because I was just, I don't want to be like, turn out like I can't think of the word, but anyway. But back then we really, I think through society has evolved in lots of ways to be more expressive, more inclusive of different cultures and races and sexual orientations. I think people are more open. I mean, we have, television and the media's, talks about being gay openly now versus 100 years ago when young. But we have a long way to go. There's so much that we keep in the shadow. There's so much that we try to put up our best face, our best persona, and the parts that are, like you said, unsavory are following us around like Gollum following. And they're really there to help us remember that, but also I think it's the humility that that we can respect our humanity, but also accept our spirituality.
Yeah, so now let's think about the dynamics between Frodo and Gollum. There's a couple of points in the movie, in the book, that Frodo expresses like a pity or a mercy towards Gollum.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to kill him. He doesn't want to destroy them, right? He understands.
He kind of has a pure heart, Frodo. Like he's not angry, right? or aggressive or wants to harm anyone.
Well, he sees that, Gollum was a ring bearer like him, but he wasn't able to.
So he has a connection to him, like.
Yeah, he feels sympathy for him because he himself is under that weight of carrying the ring. And so he has compassion towards him, and that's what gives him the power to hold the ring. But he fails in the end. If you notice, towards the very end of the scenes where they're in the crack of doom and the lava is right there and they're on that cliff, Frodo decides to keep the ring. There's an instant where he says, I'm not going to throw it in. I'm going to keep it. This is mine. This is my precious. And then it's Gollum who wrestles it and in fighting with him, finally takes the ring, but slips it into the lava. So it's the shadow that allows us to
let go of attachment.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I just got goosebumps from that. That is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. The shadow we've been denying our whole life is the key to set us free. We forget that it's in embracing our, and I hate to say darkness because none of this is really dark unless it's really the fear of those things, the fear of being seen as something other than our persona that we're really facing, not the actual thing itself. And it's just letting go of that fear. And if someone thinks we're, a certain personality that doesn't seem appealing, we're free. We're not afraid of that anymore. We can really be ourselves versus trying to prop up our persona so everyone agrees with us or everyone likes us and everyone does what we think they should be doing. And then we could just be ourselves. And I love that idea that the shadow is what frees us.
And then we can think about, well, what do these archetypal stories and myths teach us about our current age and our situation, collectively and individually as well? So we know, as human beings, we're in a time where we haven't really come to terms with what is our role with nature. Like we were saying, we appear to be pushing it away, denying that we need nature and that we're part of nature.
Just put concrete down everywhere.
And let's do technology full force.
Well, kids today, they're on their computers all the time. They're now even learning on computers because of distance learning with the COVID. And they don't go out to play anymore because it's not safe to just play in the backyard. And I want to watch my video game, play with my video game, or go on social media instead of actually talk to people. Even when they eat dinner at home, you see families, the kids are on their phones instead of talking to their parents. So that kind of disconnection from each other and nature.
Yeah. And these myths are meant to remind us of that internal journey that we need to be doing. And the destructiveness essentially comes from the denial of that mythology, of listening to that internal story, the imagination, the dreams, the unconscious content.
I think most people don't know how to be alive. They learn to survive in their life, but they really don't know how to be alive in their life. And the internal journey, the working with dreams, working with these different aspects of all the archetypes, and even facing your shadow, meditation, going to other states of awareness. There's so much to discover about ourselves, that's our inner world, that makes life, this physical life, whatever it is, so much more rich and meaningful and purposeful. And if people need to put down the phone, pay attention to their dreams, and really ask themselves deeper questions, and think about your whole life. What are you chasing? You're chasing these external things, and you never stop to say, well, why don't you chase yourself? Go inside and chase the wisdom, and that would give you so much more reward than just a nice sports car or a great promotion at work. Because we end up spending so much of our time at work being unhappy in careers we don't love, creating things like, was this someone in the Say Anything? He said, manufacturing things that people buy that no one wants anyway, and we get lost in that attachment. And humanity has, and the only way we can wake up and change our experience in the world collectively is to, one at a time, each take our own responsibility for our own mind and our own experience, and then that creates a ripple effect in the world.
Yeah, so in the movie, there's a scene where they show what the evil dark side is up to, and it shows them. I think it says that they're combining orcs with goblins. So it's essentially what we're up to as human beings. We're genetically now modifying life forms to create for our purposes, and we know it's going to go into military hands.
They're already doing that in China, I think, the military, the master races.
That's right. These archetypes give us a heads up as to what's coming up in the collective, what's going to go on. And we have to be very conscious of these things. With artificial intelligence, with genetic engineering, we're going to get into gray areas of that if we don't think about them, if we don't consciously take the reins, they're going to catch us unaware, and they're going to be there all of a sudden without us knowing what to do with these powers.
And the ego of humans will make these decisions, just like the precious. And it has a lot of power. The ego has a lot of power, but not as much as the spiritual power. But if we give the ego all the power, that's what happens. We just let it run. And a lot of us think, well, I'm just one person. The world is messed up. How do I change the world? And you do by changing yourself. And you've probably heard that before, but it is so true. Because as you shift, you create a ripple effect with everyone around you. Because people will start to change just through that transmission of you being true to yourself. And that's why we do the training, what we do, because we want to have more coaches that can help people facilitate this transformation on such a deep, profound level that we're not just thinking positive and putting a vision board together and manifesting, the next thing in our life. We're actually becoming our true self. And in that has all the power in the world. And you don't need a ring. You could let go of the ring and go to your destiny, that your purpose on earth.
Yeah, because individually we feel like, well, I'm just a little grain of sand in this huge universe. What is my work going to amount to? But Jung says that it creates that tipping point, that if enough individuals do their internal work and wake themselves up, you get to that tipping point where the culture changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the ideas that come through great art, like literature, like these books, then they become a way of guiding our work in the world. And instead of just blindly destroying nature and saying, well, there's nothing we can do because we need the jobs and we need to create these technologies, we find these opportunities that say, wait a minute, we're looking for life out on other planets while we're not even taking care of the life forms
looking
here.
for another Earth. Let's just destroy this one and keep destroying it and not do anything about it. But let's go to Mars and see if we can build something there. Mm-hmm. It's just insanity. But so I want to get to some questions before we go. But so think about, if you haven't watched The Ring or you haven't watched it in a couple of years, check it out. Look at it through new eyes now. And then we invite you to look at all the pop movies and series that you see. We're going to be talking about Dune next week, I think. I can't remember what's next. But we are really going to be able to see what can we learn besides being entertained? How can we understand ourselves better? How can we understand the world better? And what do we need to do? Like, I feel like it just has a whole new meaning when you watch it with this lens of archetypes and individuation.
And if you haven't read the books, like Debbie,
I haven't read them. I watched the movies.
We encourage you to read the books, because in reading, you're activating your own mythological imagination. And it's, I love the movies.
Well, I know I read Jung directly, so to me, I always feel like he awakens that imagination just by reading if I read Jung before I go to bed, my dreams are fantastic. So anyway, have a great, wonderful rest of your day and weekend. Stay safe. And we'll see you next week.
See you guys.
Another Soul Session.
Stay well.
Bye-bye.